those were things that kind of made us take notice and then ultimately sign up to volunteer. And part of the volunteering process came out because of Brock's education plan. This $4,000 tax credit for anyone who wanted to go to college. So in exchange for community service, the first $4 grand of college is paid for every single year. And that goes, you know, to you, whether you're an only child, whether you've got 12 brothers and sisters. He also wants to increase the Pell Grant and restructure privatized student loans, which I know a lot of you are on, so that you're not graduating with huge amounts of debt. So it kind of hit every bracket, every demographic, and every type of school that folks were going to in terms of higher education, and it would have helped my buddy down in Texas. So Olivia actually got me involved and signed up to volunteer. So I filled out that little form, and then we had the chance to go to Iowa. I hear that too.
That's your theme song.
Oh, look at the theme song every time I say Olivia Wilde. Close. That would have been awesome. But Olivia and I had the chance to go out to Iowa for 3 days before the caucus. This was in early November, I think. And we went out to Iowa, we did 3 days worth of work, and noticed something really interesting. So every time you turn on CNN, and this is happening again now, but every time you would turn on CNN in 2004 and in the primary season this past year, the stories that were run would always question whether college kids or the quote-unquote youth vote, so people 18 to 34 years of age, would actually come out and vote. And the presumption was that we didn't care, and I always assumed that people who ran political campaigns were older. And we get to Iowa, and this is the same here in New Hampshire, and most of Senator Obama's staffers and volunteers were under 25. And those who weren't under 25 were under 35. And they kind of convinced us to do a little more work and to stay. So I ended up moving to Iowa for about a month and a half. And the disclaimer that I should give you is that there was also a writer's strike going on in California. So I had no job. You actually got work during the strike. You were lucky. but the out of work thing, you know, wasn't such a bad incentive. But the reason I bring up the writer's strike is that while we were in Iowa, noticing that it was all young folks who were running the Obama campaign, we also noticed the trend in articles. So CNN ran this interesting statistic. They kept repeating, did you know that the average age of caucusing in 2004 in Iowa was 65 years of age? And I know they ran similar ads here in New Hampshire, the first state to have their caucus, and you guys are the first to have the primary. And the assumption was then not just that we didn't care, but also that we had no power. So the belief was that we were powerless, and the mainstream media certainly believed this, and they tried to perpetuate it because it made for great television. But they also ran another type of news story that talked about the writer's strike and also talked about something called new media. And the reason they talked about new media was because 18 to 34-year-olds were a huge reason why internet companies had made so much money. And they didn't mention that 18 to 34-year-olds also happen to be the youth vote. They conveniently left that blank. But they talked about MySpace, Facebook, and YouTube. How many of you have seen a video on YouTube in the last, 3 days? Okay. YouTube's free. Maybe it's a little addictive. They make $7.5 million a month in advertising revenue because of how many of us, 18 to 34, so collectively go on that website. MySpace was started not too long ago. They recently sold for just under $600 million to News Corp, one of the world's largest media conglomerates. Not such a bad feat for the folks who created MySpace. And Facebook was the most clear-cut contradiction in those two types of news stories that we saw. Facebook was started by 3 guys a couple of years ago, not too far from you, at the other school. And Facebook was first valued at $1.6 billion. Now keep in mind these 3 guys are still in their 20s, and Facebook was recently valued at roughly $6 billion. So we're sitting there in the primary and caucus states and saying to ourselves, wait a second, we've already made $6 billion for our peers' companies just by sitting in front of our computers and tagging photos and messaging your friends and waking up in the morning and very quickly untagging the photos that you tagged. But that made them $6 billion. And so the concept was, well, if we can make billions of dollars in wealth for these companies just by doing that, then think about the effect and the power that we have to change the face of a presidential election. And not just one presidential election, but really the way in which politics operate in this country to begin with. There was so much cynicism about our generation And we all came together in support of a candidate who refused to take federal lobbyist money from the very beginning, who was opposed to the Iraq War from the very beginning. All of these things that everyone said we were naive to believe, someone was actually doing. And you saw in New Hampshire that the youth vote this past primary season increased by 42% over what it was in 2004. And this is a trend that, please applaud that, because that's what you guys do. And because of the example that you set, college and university students all over the country continued that trend, and I think the highest that it hit was a peak in Florida, where they had a 300% increase in youth vote turnout between 2000 and this past primary season. So the reason that we're bringing that up is because we want you, and I'm gonna go a step further and say that we need you to volunteer. There are 23 days left until we have the opportunity to change the face of the free world. And the youth vote was critical in making that happen. The #2 news story on CNN after the Iowa caucus, and then followed by the New Hampshire primary. The #1 news story in Iowa was that Barack and Mike Huckabee won the Iowa caucuses. And the #2 news story was that the youth vote was critical in making that happen. And so the ball is very much in your court. If you choose to do nothing, you're one of 48,000 college students in the state of New Hampshire. And as Olivia and Justin pointed out, the last 2 elections in New Hampshire were decided by 7,000 and 9,000 votes respectively. So college students can single-handedly decide the fate of the election. New Hampshire is a swing state. Every single vote will actually count. So we want you to register to vote. If you think you're from out of state and can't vote here, or if you think you're going to fill out your absentee ballot and send it home to Massachusetts or Vermont or California or Texas, why don't you not do that? Re-register. You have a fair shot and a fair opportunity to do so, and we're encouraging you to do that. Wednesday's the voter registration drive here on campus from 4 to 7:30. Please take advantage of that, because your vote is so much more heavily weighted here. You have an opportunity to vote and have your voice heard. And I'm hoping that you do this for a number of people. And before I tell you their quick stories, who has already volunteered for the Obama campaign? Awesome. Who has yet to? Oh, there are so many of you who didn't raise your hands. That's fine. But if you would, where are the volunteer sign-ups? Are there some out there? I'm going to send this around also. If you haven't filled this out, I would love for all of you, I'm going to start it down here. I would love for you to sign up to volunteer. There are a number of people who we've met around the country who have been volunteering and who we would like you to do this for. At a school like Dartmouth, the fact that you can, and I still am impressed that you woke up so early, but the fact that we can sit here on a beautiful campus on an amazing Sunday morning and have a discussion about politics and the election and companies that have made billions of dollars means that we're incredibly privileged. And I know that some of us come from different walks of life. You have student loans, you've got a ton of classes and reading that you're procrastinating doing. But the fact that you're even here in such an elite school with such an incredible opportunity means that you also have an equal power to give back. And I got to tell you, the state schools are doing a lot more right now. So I would love to see you get to that level and volunteer and drive people to the polls in the community and go knock on their doors. You'll hear Howard Dean talk about this when he comes tomorrow, but door knocking and choosing your neighbors to actually get them to register to vote and bring them fact sheets about information and issues that are important to them can increase voter turnout by 10 or 12%. And that's what we want you to do.